Hello, welcome to the Psychology of Good and Evil. This lecture covers various approaches to the psychology of good and evil from a biological and clinical science perspective. To start out, I'm just going to clarify a few terms. We're interested in this lecture in psychopathy. This is not to be confused with sociopaths or psychopathology. Psychopathy refers to a particular set of biological deficits and social moral factors associated with counternormative and typically antisocial behaviors and attitudes. Psychopathology refers to mental disorders broadly, and it includes all of the ones in the DSM. So you could say, I'm interested in whether psychopathy is linked to an increased likelihood of psychopathology. Finally, sociopath is not a substitute word for psychopath, and this is because unlike the term psychopath, which has a clinical cutoff associated with it and scientific instruments validated to measure it, sociopathy is a more dated term that's not used in scientific work and typically refers to social manipulativeness. Okay, now that we have some terms cleared up, let's take a look at the theme today, biological basis of bad behavior. The clinical approach to understanding why people perform acts of violence, such as murdering people, began with observations that people's behavior could change in troubling directions when they suffered biological insults. One famous example is the case of a man named Phineas Gage, who was working on railroad construction in 1848 when there was an accident. A long tapered iron rod was shot by explosives through his face, his skull, and brain, and went right out the top of his head. Amazingly, Phineas Gage survived, and after treatment, which removed an ounce or more of brain material and an eye, and a lot of rest, he continued living his life. The rod had punctured a hole right through his brain, specifically the left frontal lobe. His friends and family noticed that there was something different about Gage after the accident. One quote from the time notes people described him as not the same person, which you'll recognize from our moral self lecture. He was irritable, he experienced a personality change, he was kind of a jerk. At the time, early phrenologists linked Gage's moral changes to damage to the brain. Kent Keel, the forensic psychologist who wrote the book you read from, and others, like the researcher Damasio, subscribe to an account of Phineas Gage as having turned into perhaps a psychopath. They say the kinds of problems that Gage experienced looked like the kinds of problems people with acquired psychopathic personalities have. Keel mapped the important damage to the orbital frontal cortex, OFC, the area near the underside of the frontal cortex, near the eye. Now, there's controversy still about how much the story of Phineas Gage has been mythologized, but what's clear is that presumption of a biological basis to behavior, a neural one in particular, became much more widespread after this natural accident was connected up to the behavior change. The specific possibility of approaching criminally insane behavior from a clinical perspective did as well.